Beautiful. May, I'm gonna, once Ronnie is done speaking, I'm gonna ask you to please give us a little bit introduction of your work within the Democratic Party as a young youth activist, as well as tell us what the current situation looks like in Gaza. And we will use that as an inspiration to contact our Congress members. So without further ado, I do wanna make sure that we do start in time. I do want to thank everyone who has taken the opportunity on a Saturday evening, afternoon to participate in this most important call to action. And, I do want to thank especially our esteemed panel of speakers, Sister Hawaida Araf, Ronnie Kesrels, as well as Sam Husseini, who I see here. And for Yemen, we do have Hassan El Tayyib, and we'll be joined by Khavdar Abdullah. And my name is Khania Jodad Barnes. I am the director of Lift the Sanctions Campaign, as well as the partnership coordinator for RootsAction, president and co-founder of Muslim Delegates and Allies. It's an honor to always be here with you and seeing so many familiar faces as well as faces that are very new. And I look forward to building together with you. I do want to note here before we begin that for the past 11 consecutive years, not for 11 consecutive years, days during the holiest month of Ramadan, deadly airstrikes by the Israeli military in Gaza, the third most densely populated area in the world, has resulted in a very large number of casualties, including 63 children. In the US, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal spoke out against the continued annexation of by the Israeli army that has been undertaken for decades. Senators Bernie Sanders and Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mark Pocan, and Rashida Tlaib, Andre Carson, and Ilhan Omar have also spoken out against these brutalities. They've also introduced legislation to stop the new $735 million in US precision-guided weapon sales to Israel, which has been approved now by Secretary Blinken as of May 21st. That is on top of the $3.8 billion in military aid, plus $8 billion in loan guarantees that come out of our taxpayers' pocket. In the meantime, the occupation has destroyed iconic city landmarks, including buildings that housed 33 media institutions. And while thousands will be marching on Washington today in solidarity for Palestine, as well as this incredible, empowering uprising that's been happening for the past month, we will take a moment in silence today before we begin and welcome our panel of speakers to remember the children in Palestine who will never have a future, as well as those mothers who mourn the loss of their children's lives. Let's bow our heads and remember them together. Thank you to our attendees who happen to be standing in solidarity with the Palestinians, as well as our Yemeni brothers and sisters. I do want to take this opportunity to thank RootsAction, Progressive Democrats of America, Middle East Alliances, Progressive Democrats of America, Muslim Delegates and Allies, World Beyond War, Peace Action, and the Arab American Caucus of California, and their entire board for being so diverse and so incredible. Before we begin, I do want to introduce our very first speaker, who continues to inspire me, my sister Hawaida Araf, who is a Palestinian-American activist and a lawyer who co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, a Palestinian-led organization using nonviolent protest and international pressure to support Palestinians living under the Israeli occupation. Hawaida was born to two Palestinian Christian parents, her mother from the West Bank and her father from the Palestinian village of Maila in Galilee, which has been now taken by the Israelis since 1949 and became a part of the Israeli state. Her parents moved from the West Bank to Detroit, Michigan, which happens to be Hawaida's birthplace, to be able to raise her away from the violence in the West Bank. She earned her Juris Doctorate in the American University's Washington College of Law. Her focus was international human rights and humanitarian law, which with a particular interest in war crimes persecution. She has co-authored the book Peace Under Fire, Israel, Palestine, and the International Solidarity Movement. Sister Hawaida, please take it away. And Ryan, if you could please unmute her, that'd be great.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Hanya, and thank you to everyone with the Lift the Sanctions Campaign, RootsAction, and everyone here, really, because we are a part of this shift that I hope everyone recognizes. Certainly Palestinians feel it, who for decades have been standing firm on their ground or in exile in refugee camps, not giving up the dream to return home and the dream of living in freedom. And we have been silenced for so long, but now we feel like we're at a tipping point. There has been a shift and there's no going back. And I think that there is, the shift is owing to two things, really. And one is Palestinian steadfastness and refusal to submit to subjugation. And two is the collective work of so many organizations and individuals in different spheres and on different levels. And it's brought us to where we are. We're not done, of course. We still have to keep pushing. And I hope that you being here shows that your commitment to do that. I was asked to talk a little bit about the international solidarity movement. And I was thinking of how to bring that in because we started the international solidarity movement about 2 decades ago. And I was living in the occupied West Bank. And the Intifada, the second Intifada, they call it, or the Al-Aqsa Intifada broke out. I had just been, there for a few months. I had gone over after graduating from college. And I participated in the demonstrations, because you can't help but, 5 minutes in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, you can see the layers of oppression. And so I participated, and Israel came at us with, it is one of the most powerful militaries in the world, and came at unarmed civilians with military might. They were firing at us. So within the first month of a popular uprising, 127 Palestinians had been shot dead. And a well-known Israeli journalist, some of you may read her stuff, Amira Haas, wrote a piece at the time highlighting that about 80% of the Palestinians that had been killed were killed from injuries to the neck and head area. So Israel had a shoot to kill policy. They weren't treating us as human beings in any sense of the word. They said that this is the force they had to use to quell the quote unquote riots. But even if you want to call them riots, you don't go shooting at people. And it's what they did. So within a month of the popular uprising, these demonstrations died down. And it's not because Palestinians suddenly decided it wasn't worth it to take it to the streets or to die for our liberation. It was more of a strategic calculation. We have been at this for 7 decades. At the time, it'd been a little bit over 5 decades, recognizing that Israel's ultimate goal is to get rid of Palestinians. They want as much of the land as possible with as little as the people on it as possible. And so making Palestinians give up on our liberation dreams or being willing to accept much less than freedom is the calculation. And so making it very difficult to work, demolishing our olive trees, taking our land, building settlements that we can't go into, roads that we can't use, making it so you can't work and that you want to leave. And that's aside from, all of our people that have been imprisoned, the massive losses of lives. It's calculated to make us give up and leave. And so Palestinians, and after the uprising, the second Intifada, and when we were faced with this massive military might, it was, I believe, a strategic decision that what we need to do is focus on staying put, feeding our families. If I'm going to go to work so I can be able to put bread on the table so that we can stay here, instead of taking part in a demonstration where I might get injured and killed, and then no one is going to hold Israel responsible, because Israel has never been held responsible for any of the Palestinian lives that it has taken, for the tens of thousands, not to mention the constant oppression that Palestinians are forced to live under, those that have been living in refugee camps for over 70 years, that can't come home, that have been separated from their families. This level of oppression Israel has never been held responsible for. And on top of that, at the time, the mainstream media was reporting that it's the Palestinians' fault because, there was a peace process. And why did the Palestinians suddenly walk away from the negotiating table and start this intifada? And you were hearing things like, Arafat is going back to his terrorist roots and he started this intifada, and Palestinians are choosing violence over peace. It was all, garbage, but that's how it was being reported on. And therefore these are all the factors that went into why the popular demonstrations died down. But then what happened is that those with arms in Palestinian society, the political factions, they started shooting at checkpoints, at settlements in ways that didn't make strategic sense. But it was some way of fighting, right? And that gave Israel the cover, if you will, to then start bombing our cities and flying over with the Apache helicopters and the F-16s and rolling their tanks in. And then the suicide bombing started, and then that gave Israel even more, a cover to be able to say that they're fighting terror. And I, at the time, and others, I'm like, what are we going to do here to change this dynamic? And that's when the idea of the international solidarity movement came. Let's globalize this intifada. Let's call people from all over the world to come stand with us. And honestly, it was like a naive dream I had, to have like thousands and thousands of civilians just blocking the Israeli tanks from being able to roll into Palestinian cities. And we just, this was before social media, but we did have email, and we just emailed some people and then said, come, whoever will, which, was a little ambitious, because on the news, it was a war zone. Even my parents, who were still in the United States, were calling me saying, you got to come home. My response to that is, I'm home and I'm not leaving, and I'm asking people to come and join us. Thousands didn't come, but we had a few dozen people come, about 50 for our first campaign. And we joined Palestinians in challenging different facets of the Israeli occupation, mainly marching on checkpoints and dismantling roadblocks. But the point is, I saw at the time 4 key factors, that went into building the power of what we were trying to do. Why was it so powerful? One, you're going to provide some international observers or accompaniment, because when Palestinians, as I mentioned, when we were marching alone, people got shot down, permanent injuries, losing limbs, and nobody was held accountable. So hopefully, if you had people from all over the world with us, Israeli soldiers wouldn't use lethal force. The second thing was like, let's try to change the way that this is being reported on. It's not Palestinians are violent and want to drive the Jews into the sea or eradicate Israel. It's like Palestinians want their freedom. It's freedom versus occupation, oppression, and colonization. And people from all over the world were with us. Hopefully, if they weren't listening to Palestinians, maybe people will listen to, why this Jewish person from New York, or this, Greek young woman from living on Greek island decided to come and stand with Palestinians. And then, people go back home. Palestinians are virtually trapped in our movement. You can't leave unless you have Israeli permission to leave. But international people can go back home. They spread the word about what's happening, and share pictures, share stories, and maybe motivate other people to come and work on local pressure campaigns. And that's been happening. We see that people that have been with the international solidarity movement have been, at the forefront of the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, and of other actions. And the fourth component, which is so important, but I think is sometimes underrated or maybe not even considered, and it's the human impact of letting people know that they're not forgotten, that they're being seen and being heard. Anyway, that was the idea. That's how it started. And now, 2 decades later, I can't even count. We have had well over 10,000 people come from 40 different countries around the world. And people, for some reason, once they see what's happening with their own eyes, they don't forget Palestine. They don't forget the people they met, the beauty of it. And so they're working, they're in Washington, marching on Washington now. They're leading campaigns they're building solidarity and working on this intersectional fight that we have for the liberation and freedom of all people. And it's part of the work, of course, with all the other organizations and with people. You don't have to be part of an organization to make a difference, right? It's you do what you can do. If you can do nothing more than post something, one thing every day on social media, or talk to your neighbor or to your coworker about what's happening, you're contributing to the shift that we need to see and that we have seen, but we need to go a little bit, keep pushing. I remember in 2001, we dropped a big banner over this wall facing Israeli tanks, and so the media could see it, that said, "It's the occupation, stupid." Like, we were fighting for them to recognize, for the media to even report on it being an occupation, as opposed to a dispute, a territorial land dispute, as opposed to an occupation. And now we're even moving that discussion. It's not just an occupation, it is colonization, it is apartheid. And that people were saying that, and that's being reported. Of course, we have, and I think maybe from Sam or others will hear about where Congress is. Still very, very pro-Israel, but it's not what it was. Israel's not, this kind of bipartisan issue anymore. And that comes from not just, the work of communicating with our members of Congress, but also in organizing locally to elect people that really represent us. And so we have champions in Congress now. We have people willing to stand up. And just a couple of weeks ago, if some of you saw speech after speech after speech on the Congress, on the House floor, speaking up against Israeli apartheid. Never before did we see that, and that's happening from all of the work here. I will just end. I know we're going to hear from someone that has family living in Gaza, and I may have gone over time, but it's so important. I probably don't have to say this to this group, but sometimes even everyone needs a reminder, right? We're in this together, not to look away that the missiles aren't falling, because certainly the media turns away. And I remember trying to contact the media in Palestine to cover our protests, and they're like, "Well, if there's blood, call us. We'll leave our hotel room to come cover what you're doing." It's when the missiles are falling that they care. Right? It's not, Palestinians' everyday struggle. It's not that they've been marching and struggling, and people ask where the Palestinian Gandhis are. They don't see the hundreds and hundreds of Gandhis for decades have been mobilizing, organizing, marching, non-violently like the world wants us to be, but that's not what they pay attention to. So I'm asking us not to look away, because obviously Palestine is still not free. The oppression is more than I can put into words. But if some of you may have heard the story, but I'm going to repeat it, because it is I think the epitome of what it's like to live under Israel's repressive colonial rule, a power that wants to get rid of you. And it is the story of one little girl named Aisha Lulu. 2 years ago, when she was at the age of 5, a bubbling, bright, beautiful little girl who was diagnosed with brain cancer. And unfortunately in Gaza, they could not do the operation that she needed, because Israel has decimated Gaza hospitals. I mean, they work on limited electricity per day. They can't get in the equipment they need. They can't provide cancer treatment in Gaza, even basic medical supplies. People have had to have surgery without anesthesia because of the Israeli closure and restrictions on Gaza. But a Palestinian hospital in Jerusalem could do the surgery for her. Of course, she needed Israeli permission to be able to leave Gaza, this 5-year-old girl, to get life-saving brain surgery. After weeks, they were able to secure a permit for her to leave. Jerusalem's only an hour and a half away drive, but her parents didn't get permits to go with her. So she would have to travel alone, essentially. Her parents applied and reapplied, and they were denied and denied. Her aunts and uncles applied, and they were denied. Her neighbors applied, and they were denied. Finally, they found one elderly woman who the girl didn't really know, but she had a permit to leave, and she accompanied this little girl, crying and scared. She's 5 and going for this major surgery without her parents. Luckily, the surgery went well. It was successful, but the girl was so distressed that in recovery, her situation was deteriorating. She stopped talking. And the doctors called her parents and said, you just have to find a way to get here. The stress is impeding her recovery. So whatever you need to do, find a way to get here. Imagine if you're a parent, you have your daughter just an hour away, but you can't get to her, who just had brain surgery and wants you. Israelis didn't give her parents permission. And the girl with tears in her eyes closed them for the last time and died alone. And that situation still exists in Gaza, where people that need medical attention are denied because according to Gaza, Israel's policy on Gaza, you don't have the right to a dignified life. They keep people barely existing. And that should not ever exist, but certainly not in the 21st century, and certainly not when we are funding the oppressor the way we are. So let me end there. Thank you again for all of that you're doing and for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sister Hawaida, and hopefully at some point, we're going to talk about the social media role in all of this and how we can help amplify these stories, even though these media buildings are being bombed and destroyed. How can we help here and internationally to uplift these voices and these stories? But why today is so incredibly important, before I hand it over to my co-host Ryan to introduce our next esteemed panelist, is that after the question and answer, we will call members of Congress to co-sponsor Representative Betty McCollum's bill, which is the HR 2590 to promote and protect the human rights of Palestinians living under occupation, and to ensure that United States is held accountable for the funding that they provide for these atrocities to take place with our tax dollars. So I really do urge for you to stay and stick around until the very end of the call, because today, even though we're not marching on Washington, we are going to make a huge impact. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Hawaida, and I look forward to the Q&A with you. Ryan, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Hanya, and thank you, Hawaida. That was riveting stuff to hear, and it's so sad to hear what's going on there, and that the story you told at the end there is horrific to hear. So I'm glad we still have all these people here, though, who are trying to do something about this to improve the situation. And I think you're 100% right when you said things are changing here. We did just hear a bunch of Congress people actually stand up for Palestinian lives. So that is a good thing. We're getting traction. We're starting to create some change. Our next speaker today is Sam Husseini. Sam is a Jordanian Palestinian writer and political activist. He is the communications director of the Institute for Public Accuracy, a DC-based nonprofit group that promotes progressive experts as alternate sources for mainstream media reports. He formerly worked at the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee and at the media watch group Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. Husseini has written articles for a variety of publications, including Counterpunch, The Nation, and The Washington Post. Sam, how are you doing? I've had to ask you to unmute.
Do it? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the organizer for this, and it's great to be on with Haida and Ronnie, who have done such extraordinary work, as well as the entire panel. Let me try to contribute what I can from my perspective and the work that I've done. I think that the situation is changing somewhat, in that there is movement in Congress and it's somewhat more people-powered. That's not to say that it hasn't happened before. You had somebody like Paul Findley challenge the US-Israeli relationship, a pro-civil rights Republican in the 1980s did this. His career was immediately cut short, including by the operations of a political apparatchik who has now achieved great fame, named Rahm Emanuel. And similarly, Charles Percy, the senator from Illinois, suffered a similar fate. Just recently, after the, not more recently, in 2014, you had Donna Edwards, who was a congressman from Maryland, where I live, And after that, the Israeli assault, the major assault in 2014, she actually went to Gaza, and pro-Israeli forces immediately dropped money. She then tried to run for Senate, and pro-Israeli forces dropped a ton of money against her, and she lost that Senate race and therefore ended her political career. And instead now the senator, the junior senator from Maryland is now Chris Van Hollen, instead of Donna Edwards, a serious progressive African-American woman. I think people have to keep in mind that there have been attempts and there is progress, and we have to be able to push anybody and everybody. If a member of the Squad or anybody else says Israel is apartheid, the next question to them needs to be, well, we had sanctions against apartheid South Africa, didn't we? So why don't we do that now with Israel? I'm especially delighted to be on here with Ronnie in all of the tremendous work of the anti-apartheid movement. And I was recently looking at a video of Desmond Tutu with the journalist David Frost from several years ago. And he basically outlined and clarified that the sanctions against South Africa were basically the last attempt to say, we can resolve this nonviolently. Tutu said, I am not a pacifist, I am a peace lover. And if you, the international community, are incapable of going along and implementing sanctions to end this horrific regime, then it becomes impossible to resolve this peacefully. That was Desmond Tutu's words regarding the situation in South Africa. That's not to justify violence from anybody, but that is a fact. And so the onus becomes on people not just simply to rhetorically support Palestinians, but to do so with concrete actions. Desmond Tutu also had a very notable piece in The Guardian just a few months ago, actually on New Year's Eve. And it was a challenge to the Biden administration to finally acknowledge that Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal. Since Israel acquired nuclear weapons, they have refused to acknowledge that they have them, and the US government has gone along with this. And the last several administrations have even apparently given secret letters to Israel, confirming to the Israelis that they will not acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons. And the import, or part of the import of Desmond Tutu's piece, was to tell Biden, don't do that. Do not write a letter to the Israelis saying that you will not acknowledge them. Indeed, acknowledge Israel's nuclear weapons. He wrote that there are few things more important to highlight. And this is Desmond Tutu, who was, of course, chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa. There are few things more important to note than an arsenal of nuclear weapons in the hands of an apartheid state. Martin Luther King said that the ultimate logic of racism is genocide. I think that stays with us. And I think that part of the import of the Palestinian struggle is that it's in a sense the tip of the spear of a continuation of a colonial system. That is, we had settler colonialism from Europe that eviscerated peoples and communities around the world, and that Israel is sort of a continuation of that, and hopefully the last continuation of that, and if properly challenged, can help end the prospect of that force materializing in the world. As far as I know, not only, of course, has the Biden administration refused to acknowledge Israel's nuclear weapon and therefore trigger US laws. The Glenn Symington Amendment stipulates that there should be no US funding for any state that violates nuclear proliferation. Israel would fall under that. It is a twice over nuclear proliferator. It acquired its own nuclear weapons and it attempted to sell nuclear weapons to the apartheid regime of South Africa. There is a analyst, Grant Smith, who has attempted to contact congressional offices to get them to invoke Glenn Symington. He actually had a lawsuit on this, and it was thrown out, not for the merits, but just simply saying he didn't have standing to pursue the lawsuit because he wasn't a member of Congress. As far as I can tell, no sitting member of Congress has said that Israel has nuclear weapons. I'm going to repeat that. No sitting member of Congress, to my knowledge, has forthrightly acknowledged that Israel has nuclear weapons. They should say that because it's true, and we know that it's true because Mordecai Vanunu sacrificed much of his life to make that truth known to the world. And further, they should say there's a law on the books, Glenn Symington. It's been on the books for years. It was actually invoked regarding India and Pakistan when they acquired nuclear weapons, that they had difficulties with their aid. They might be able to find a way around it, but it should at least be invoked. And I think that that is another lever, and it shows the power dynamics by highlighting Israel's nuclear arsenal. We highlight the power dynamics involved here. Largely defenseless indigenous population faced with one of the most potent nuclear weapons powered regimes on the planet. That is a rogue state in many ways. Israel hasn't signed the Bioweapons Convention, in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and so on. This is part of what makes it a grave threat, not only to the Palestinian people who have been suffering under its yoke for all of these decades, but to the entire world. It has the Samson option. Samson option was highlighted by Noam Chomsky decades ago and was a title of a book by Seymour Hersh, that Israel could attempt to literally bring down the planet if it didn't get its way by sparking a nuclear war. So I think that members of Congress from across the political spectrum need to be challenged, both people who are saying some good things, at least rhetorically, as well as, of course, those who are either silent or not saying anything of import or just going along with the Biden administration. And I think that there's a strong role for journalists to play by asking the tough questions. We've seen a little bit of that at the State Department. That's been one of the silver linings of what we've seen in the last month. Some challenging from some media at the State Department, but I think there needs to be a great deal more, and that can be done at the independent media level as well as in the establishment media. And I think a lot of what Paita said, and I'm sure what Ronnie will highlight, is in terms of the global dynamics of this. It's much more of a people-oriented global dynamics with BDS, with international solidarity. It's not the global dynamics anymore of appealing to the Saudis to help the Palestinians. Indeed, this sort of leads into the next panel here. There is, as it has now become clearly obvious and has been for many decades, a Saudi Israeli alliance. That is the two apartheid states effectively dominating the region, and US policies that have bludgeoned the traditional centers of civilization in the region. Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo are either in chains or traumatized by the violences they've had to suffer the last several decades. So I think that the challenges are tremendous here, but I think that the tools and the increasing reliance on people-powered centered movements, global dynamics, akin to the February 15th, 2003 protests that severely challenged the Bush administration as it moved towards the Iraq invasion are a great deal of the solution before us to try to ensure a resolution of this conflict that is fair and just and equitable, and save a great deal of horrors that may come if we fail in this case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I'm really glad that we talked about this. I'm going to ask that we also talk a bit about the Leahy Law and how and why Israel is not accountable for the human rights violations using the military forces that is provided by the US. But I think this really segues into welcoming our next speaker. Oftentimes when we talk about sanctions, the first example that comes up is South Africa, and how the US always ends up taking so much of the credit for the sanctions that they applied to the apartheid regime. But in fact, it was the BDS movement, and it's the National African Congress that was at the forefront of this incredible historic movement. Ronnie, I would love to take this moment to introduce you to our audience members. Ronnie Kasrils is a South African politician and military commander. He was Minister of Intelligence Services and a member of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, as well as a member of the Central Committee of South African Communist Party. Kasrils has written several early books on Bertrand Russell and poetry, many articles on politics, and for his work, he's earned the Alan Paton Award. Ronnie, I would love to, if I may, ask you to please talk to us about your involvement with the South African Communist Party, African National Congress, and give us a focus on why BDS was so necessary for the anti-apartheid movement, and kind of tie that with the Palestinian cause and liberation. If I may ask you to do so, take the floor, please.
Well, thanks very much indeed. I better say good day to all of you. Here we're saying good night to each other in Johannesburg. I want to start off by just touching on what Sam said about nuclear weaponry as a way to get into this very interesting discourse. And that is that apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa were bedfellows. That was an unholy alliance. And on the nuclear issue, it was Zionist apartheid Israel that actually provided apartheid South Africa with the wherewithal and the assistance to build 6 nuclear weapons, and they were in the process of a 7th. South Africa didn't have the expertise at that particular stage. They needed Israel. And I want to tell you that when I was once a politician, by the way, I'm not a politician. I don't like politicians. They need it, but they got to be principled. I'm a political activist for sure. When we came to power, I was with President Mandela. I happened to be the Deputy Minister of Defense, and the American ambassador had been pleading with Mandela that South Africa should dismantle our 7 nuclear weapons. They were dead scared, the Yanks, that nuclear weapons would fall into South African hands. And they knew damn well that South Africa had developed them with Israel's support. And yet we have this utter hypocrisy where they've allowed Israel to have a stockpile of something like 200. That's something to bear in mind. Now, the ANC and everything that I will say, I'll leave it to your imagination, because it's Palestine, it's the same struggle, and not only the South African one, because we're talking about a South African struggle against a system called apartheid, which actually evolved out of the colonial dispossession of people's land and rights, not just in Southern Africa, but all over the world. So apartheid develops out of the colonization of South Africa, and there were 5 million whites with huge resources at their disposal, that particular state, although they were greatly outnumbered by indigenous Black people. The colonialists had divided those people into their separate ethnic groups, and grand apartheid was about these divisions, the Bantustanization, the race laws, the discrimination, and the use of vicious measures to prevent any form of resistance, to keep people down, to keep people without hope, to keep people believing that it was impossible to stand up against the Uber boss, the white supremacist, be they Zionist Israel, be they white South Africa. And they had the same kind of mission, because under Cecil John Rhodes and these English imperialists, it was about the colonization justification everywhere, and that was the white man's burden. That was the civilizing mission. The Afrikaner nationalists added to it, and it's just so akin to the fundamentalism of the Bible, and that was we're the chosen race, we're the white race, and God has given us the covenant to use force or any means to rule the Black people in this country, who was then termed terrorists, or the Swart Gevaar is the black peril, or the Rooi Gevaar was the red peril, in order to brainwash the whites into support for the apartheid repression, and to get Reagan and Thatcher and their ilk on board supporting apartheid South Africa. You can see the absolute similarities between the two, which is exactly why people in South Africa so identify with the anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-apartheid struggle of the Palestinian people, who we see dispossessed in the same way. So we see Israel as this colonial settlement, this racism, and so on. What happened in South Africa has happened with the Palestinian people, who we see facing a much more mortal enemy than we did. We, as freedom fighters, from the time Tutu went there in 1988, to a whole string of leading South Africans right through, as we came there into the Second Intifada and so on. I was there in 2004 and 2007 as a minister in Palestine, visiting Gaza and the West Bank, and we saw it as far worse. It's not Ronnie Casuals telling you this. It's so many of our eminent people that the Palestinians are facing a worse situation than we ever did. And it's because they've got such absolute support and finance and the armaments, the impunity from not only the USA, but from all the white supremacist former colonialists of this world. And that's what the Palestinians are up against. In terms of our struggle and the resistance, we faced brutality, Sharpeville massacre. They boasted that they had cracked the ANC, broken our back, etc. At times, our people were very demoralized, but there's always, as with the Palestinian people, there's the samut, this belief that people will rise up and struggle. And what we had, in short, was 4 pillars of struggle, which have applied to the Palestinian struggle. And we don't prescribe what methods people should use. But our 4 pillars, and I've discussed this with Fatah, with Hamas, with Palestinian civil society over and over through the years, and they've grasped this. And our 4 pillars emerge out of our study at the same time of the Vietnamese struggle against American aggression. And the 4 pillars were, in the first primary place, is political struggle, the political unity of people, the mass political struggle, the intifada. and political leadership, which has to be principled and unified. It's the unity of the people. And we see this with the Palestinians against great odds emerging now at this tipping point. That's reinforced for us by building a strong underground network within our country, within South Africa, because we were operating across the borders. We had fled, we had set up our military bases outside, but we found that we had to build within South Africa an underground network that linked with the mass political struggle, that linked with an appeal, and we were successful, to white people, a small percentage, but who crossed over and showed the myth of race supremacy. We had armed struggle. That reinforced our people's political struggle. Key to it was the fourth pillar, international solidarity, which has been referred to already. And within that was BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Together with the internal struggle, these became absolutely irresistible force. And I would point out that in relation to the anti-apartheid struggles everywhere, it was twofold. One was the grassroots, the people. I think I'm coming to the end now. I've got 10 minutes. I'm watching my watch, my clock here. Okay, it's just on 10 minutes. So give me 2 minutes to end and I'm there. And in terms of this, it's two parallel pursuits. The one is the mobilization of people in all countries of the world, but particularly those who support the apartheid system. And the United States and Britain and France and Germany and the European Union and those Arab states who are facing the wrath of the Arab street as well. So this is how we pressurized from the grassroots governments. And we had a situation in the United States in 1985 with a black lobby as very important spearhead, demanding through Congress what was called the AAA, the anti-apartheid laws, in which Congress accepted sanctions. Reagan was refusing to go with that. But in the end, like the British, like the French, in the end and through the United Nations, sanctions was applied at those levels. And you had this massive upswell of people throughout the world who were supporting the South Africans. So we made it in South Africa. We overcame, we forced the change. And I want to say this, it is a tipping point. The Palestinian people have a tremendous way to go, but their determination, what we see from the younger generation, the young men, the young women, highly sophisticated, like you people are. This is something that Israel, from the time of Ben Gurion, said, the next generation after the 48, when we have swept them away, the 750,000, the people into Gaza, what did Ben Gurion, an absolute evil colonial racist, he said, and he laughed, the next generation are going to forget it all. We'll have got rid of them. Palestinian people are showing just how wrong he was. And that's why international solidarity is so important in the struggle. I believe that we are coming to a point where we can see that Zionist Israel is actually going to have to change. I'm not going to prophesy how, but it will crumble. I'm saying this as a South African who saw a would-be giant, but with feet of clay falling, and we can sense and see it now. It's unity of the Palestinian people in their struggle that is vital, reinforced by BDS. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Ronnie. I'll ask the first question, and I'm really urging our audience members to please put their questions in Q&A for Ryan and I to ask our notable speakers. But Fatou Bensouda, who is the chief persecutor of the International Crimes Court, in 2014 announced that her office was launching a formal investigation into war crimes committed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip, by the Israeli army. And under the ICC's Rome status, inhuman acts committed in the context of the institutional regime of systemic oppression and domination by one racial group over another racial group with the intent to maintain that regime constitutes the crime against humanity of apartheid. Let's talk about the Leahy Law, if possible. I am very curious to know why this law doesn't apply to Israel when in fact Israel does violate human rights as well as these are weapons that, as we mentioned earlier, on a number of occasions provided by the US to Israel. And I'll open it up to all of our speakers if they can kind of lead the way.
I'll take a stab. I'm not an expert on the Leahy Law. As I understand it, it's complex and it, although I hate that term on the subject matter, it deals with individual units, military units and such, but it can still be applied if used forcefully. For example, it could now potentially be applied to the Israeli Air Force. Right after having bombed Gaza like this, achieving such high massacre and human rights violations and so on, that's what the law was supposed to prevent. So I think it can and should be applied. I'm not positive if there's somebody on the Hill pushing for that, as they are for the Betty McCollum bill. The ICC should definitely be looked at. I should also note, and I was talking before about how to challenge members of the Squad about BDS, about acknowledging Israel's nuclear weapons. We can also challenge other, governments that profess solidarity with the Palestinians. In 2014, I wrote a piece, which I'll also link to here, that highlighted, and we've seen some of this again, how different governments talked about Israel committing genocide. The Iranians, Evo Morales' government, Venezuela. And of course, interestingly, all of these governments who do this are frequently the ones that the US targets, right? Evo Morales, not there anymore. Venezuela being hit hard. Lula in Brazil, and so on. But there are legal mechanisms. There is the International Convention Against Genocide, and you've had international lawyers, the late, great Michael Ratner of the Center for Constitutional Rights, argue that what Israel is doing constitutes genocide. Genocide doesn't necessarily mean slaughtering, millions upon millions of people. It is a set of policies designed to target and kill a substantial subset of an ethnic group, or various groups. So those governments can and should be challenged to use those legal mechanisms, to not just simply leave it as a rhetorical statement to say, oh, Israel's committing genocide and they should stop. There's a legal mechanism that they should attempt to use. So that's what I can contribute.
Thank you. And Ronnie, if you would please add to this, and Sister Hawaida, if you want to take a stab at it, please. Oh.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, here I am.
Oh,
sorry.
Hawaida, if you could add on to it, and then I'll give the floor to Ronnie. Thank you.
Sorry, I've lost you. I thought you wanted me. Are we going to Hawaida? Is that it?
Yes, let's go to Hawaida,
yes.
and then I'll bring it back to you.
I beg your pardon.
That's
Sure.
okay. That's okay.
I'll try to keep it brief. We constantly hear that Israel or Israel apologists claiming that we single out Israel all the time, right? As we don't apply the same standards to Israel, or why are you just complaining about Israel when all of these other countries do X, Y, Z? And I would say that it's just the opposite. Or Israel is singled out, right? But it's singled out for exceptionalism. we do have the Leahy Law. We also have what's called the Arms Export Control Act. The Leahy Law is, to cut off funding to certain units that are accused of committing human rights abuses. And it's not that we don't know what these units are. There are lots of human rights organizations and individuals we have in Israel that break the silence. They're ex-soldiers. We know generally what brigades are. I mean, it's the whole state, it's state policy, but if you want to break it down to, different units, we have that information. Also with the Arms Export Control Act, it's supposed to prohibit the provision of American weapon or US weapons to countries that are using them for offensive purposes. That's why Israel's constantly saying we're defending ourselves. And that's why you see American administrations and the members of Congress constantly saying Israel's defending itself. Israel has a right to defend itself. So, and this is the result of, I think, just historically a very powerful pro-Israel and weapons lobby. And that's what we're up against. I'm part of the National Lawyers Guild, and we have recently submitted a report to the State Department about US policy and how to align US policy with international law. And we're seeking to follow up right now with the legal department. And that's one of the areas that we want to bring up is the Arms Export Control Act, Leahy Law, and why Israel is not being subjected to them. I remember back when I worked at the American Institute, there was a few inquiries made to the State Department and Department of Defense to see how Israel is violating these laws. And, they take the requests and then they just kind of disappear. They do nothing with them. And that's, an example of US or Israel exceptionalism that needs to end. And so I think that, it's growing. The voices are growing. The sanction petition that you guys are signing and continuing to push with Betty McCollum's bill, and we'll continue to push in other ways. Briefly on the ICC, yes, the ICC or the prosecutor has said that they're opening. Her office is opening an investigation and has identified so far 3 different areas as far as Israel's actions are concerned. She said she was also looking into Palestinian violations, which is fine. Palestinians don't object to that. They just want Israel held accountable. And the areas that she identified were Israel's settlement enterprise, their response to the Great March of Return in Gaza, where some of you seen how the Israeli soldiers were just gunning down people marching for their freedom, and then the Israel's actions in the 2014 assault on Gaza. And I suspect that it's also going to include the latest assault, which is good. There's a lot to talk about here. It's probably a subject of another thing, but there's, when we're talking about apartheid and genocide, these are all under the jurisdiction of the ICC. They could look into that. There hasn't been and there are attorneys and representatives of victims that are, filing briefs with the court that we should go further than just war crimes, because the things that I identified right now are war crimes, but Israel is, credibly, we can say, obviously it has to be proven, committing acts of persecution, committing apartheid, and I would even say there's a strong case to be made for genocide. So it remains to be seen what happens, but the fact that they're finally opening up an investigation, of course, Israel said they're not going to cooperate with the court. That's nothing new. Also, the UN Human Rights Council the other day said that they're also opening an investigation into the latest actions in Gaza, and Israel immediately declared that they're not going to cooperate. This is how Israel continues to violate international law, international consensus, and never held accountable, because the US has historically just prevented, not just funded Israel, but also prevented Israel from any kind of accountability, which has contributed to the impunity with which it continues to persecute the Palestinian people. So it's good. We just have to keep up our work. There are positive signs. We're nowhere near the end. We have a lot more work to do, but we're seeing finally some results or the fruits, I guess, of our labor of love over the years.
And Ronnie, if you could give us a brief respond to this question, and I want to bring Hassan Al-Tayyib in, who's a legislative director, to talk about what is happening in Congress with regards to some of our concerns.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to take time now because everybody's covered it. Just to say that the latest crimes are going to increase the pressure and will expose Israel, its war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the United States for protecting Israel. I note that the UNRWA representative in Gaza was saying yesterday that they are looking into war crimes aspects because of the way Israel's bombing is taking place, taking out so many families and innocent people, etc. The one aspect that's also interesting is that although the United States and Israel aren't parties to signing the Rome Convention, so they say that the ICC can't touch them, in actual fact, coming to countries, let's say South Africa, Finland, maybe Sweden, or countries whose nationals have been in Gaza or on the West Bank, or even inside 48 Israel, who have been taken out in a criminal way. Say it's a South African, and we're not sure yet. We've got South Africans who live in Gaza. If a South African is murdered there, we can take it up with the ICC. So the legal people are looking at that. But we know that America, USA, Israel can just flaunt these things. It's pressure, pushing back and exposing them. That's very important.
And Hassan Al-Tayyib, I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself. Oh, yeah.
I can. Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, the great discussion here. Just a couple things that I wanted to flag as far as the Foreign Assistance Act and the Arms Export Control Act. First off, on the Arms Export Control Act, the joint resolution of disapproval that AOC and Bernie introduced was really historic. This is the first time since the late 70s that anybody has challenged an individual weapon sale. I think people in the U.S. here have a special responsibility because of the $3.8 billion that we give to Israel, and we have a lot of levers to cut that support off and to try to condition it and end it altogether. So I think some good next steps there is, even though the licenses have been approved by State Department, we can still block delivery. So FCNL and others are calling on the Biden administration to block the delivery of these sales, and they can do that relatively easily because it's a direct commercial sale by Boeing to Israel. So that's one thing. Your members of Congress, can write a letter to the administration also asking that they do that. And, we can just do it by saying that these are being used for human rights violations, and that's plenty. There's some reform issues that we could talk about with that particular, vehicle, but that's really critical. And we've sort of opened up a Pandora's box. So anytime there is another sale to Israel, as far, with the, any weapon sales to Israel, we can trigger the joint resolutions of disapproval. We can get more and more members to introduce that. Just know that any one of your members in the House or Senate can do that at any point and work to block delivery. On the Foreign Assistance Act, I think it's really important that folks know how that actually works. It can be triggered on the grounds that the munitions may be used by a foreign unit to engage and carry out human rights violations. Somebody can invoke that. It triggers a 30-day review. And if Congress isn't satisfied with the review from State Department, they can trigger Section 502B of the Foreign Assistance Act and bring to the floor a resolution of disapproval and again force the question, should we be providing this military support? Any one of your members in the House or Senate can do this. And last but not least, the McCollum bill is super important. I think trying to get a version of that attached to the National Defense Bill or the DoD bill. That's a few things that FCNL is working on, is trying to take that language and have some really clear end use restrictions on aid to Israel.
Excellent, excellent. Want to shift over. We have one question in the chat, but we got to move through this, and we have one more speaker who's going to talk about the situation on the ground in Gaza, and then we're going to move to our action. But real quick, to any of our speakers who want to quickly comment on this, from Wadad, the question is that Anti-Defamation League has a spokesman who commands attention by the media. Who do we have in the U.S. on the Palestinian side who can be just as authoritative in speaking, and who the national media can refer to and pay attention to? And that's for any of our speakers. Like, who is our best asset in the media for this situation? Is there anyone?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of people, you know, my day job is with the Institute for Public Accuracy, and we've tried to put out a ton of people. I think some of them are on this panel. Perhaps Noura Erakat has been the Palestinian voice who's gotten the most traction. I think she's gotten on CNN at least once or twice. And I actually just linked to something, an argument that she made that basically Israel occupying Palestine puts it in such a legal position that virtually everything that it does is outside international norms, given the way that it's acting. So, I mean, the media is obviously a very, very rigged system. The corporate media has a very deep-seated pro-Israeli bias and pro-US military bias, and try to overcome that in a number of ways. Again, with just my little neck of the woods, I was putting out a news release, every day during the crisis and afterwards, featuring voices from Gaza, featuring legal analysts, featuring a whole assortment of critical facts and voices. So we need to push the media as much as possible, but we can't possibly depend on it. I think that there needs to be redoubled efforts to build meaningful, hopefully global, independent media. There have been setbacks in this regard. The Real News was promising, but it's not able to produce as much anymore, if people are aware of that project. Democracy Now! Can do some good things, but I don't think that I heard them talk about BDS during the entire crisis, which I think is notable. So again, I think people need to keep their ears open and scrutinize all players, whether that's establishment or obviously regressive, explicitly pro-Israeli entities, as well as others.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Sam. We do have another speaker who's going to talk for just a couple of minutes real quick. Let me spotlight the video here. And May, can you help me with the pronunciation of your first name real quick?
May.
May. Okay, great. May is a student activist whose family lives in Gaza right now. So we wanted to give you a couple minutes to explain your work you're doing here and the situation on the ground there, and give us a little insight if you could.
So most of my work is mostly through the Democratic Party, or just starting student organizations to spread awareness about social issues. Some of the organizations I've been a part of are localized groups within Los Angeles, and we try to kind of lobby members of Congress and representatives to work on progressive issues. But something that I've seen a lot in those organizations is a lack of recognition for more international issues, especially Palestine. And through a lot of the campaigns that I've volunteered for or interned for individually, even if the specific person kind of recognizes what's happening in Palestine and supports that, they're very hesitant to speak up about it, just because of how it might look, or just are afraid of the consequences, even if they are supporting it. So I think what we kind of need to work on is getting those people that are already supporting our movement and see what's happening to get on board and speak more vocally about it. And then just kind of talking more about living in Palestine and my family that's living there currently. They all live in Gaza, and we can see what's happening with like what's happening on the ground with the bombings. From personal experience, I lived there from 2005 to 2007, so I was pretty young, but I still remember instances of bombings and things that were happening there. And a specific instance was all my siblings went to a school. It was an American international school. So a lot of the teachers were foreigners, and they taught them English, and it was just and it was bombed multiple occasions through the 2 years that we were living there. And I think that something Israel works really hard on is kind of demoralizing people and taking away anything that kind of brings prosperity to the area. So nobody was hurt in those instances. The schools were bombed at night when nobody was there, but we could still see how they kind of try to take anything away that would bring prosperity and bring change. And then kind of adding on to that, what's currently happening, there was a story recently about that Rashida Tlaib spoke about, a mother putting all her children to sleep in the same bedroom as her, so that if they died during airstrikes, they would die alone, which is heartbreaking, but it shows the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. Innocent people are being bombed throughout the day. There's no kind of, Israel claims that they're bombing Hamas and that the reason these people are dying is because Hamas are using them as human shields, but we can clearly see that that's not what's happening. About 80 to 90% of the people who are dying are innocent civilians, nothing to do with Hamas, their children, and yeah.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. Sending our best to your family. Absolutely there. We appreciate you coming on the call to talk about that a little bit. We are running over time, so we're going to shift over to our action now. There we go. Thank you for spotlighting me. So if you look over into the chat, I've just posted, or I'm about to post, an action kit specifically for the occupied Palestinian territories. I'm going to share my screen now so I can walk you through what that looks like. Does everybody see that? Can I get a thumbs up from anyone who can see that I'm sharing my screen? Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. So in this document, we have several actions we can take today, and some of our speakers will have their own actions. I urge them to post those in the chat as well. On this document, first, you can click here to sign the petition telling Biden to lift the sanctions for COVID relief. And we're doing this for both our Yemen action and our Palestinian action. There are actions that can be taken right now by the Biden administration to put out a waiver that would allow these blockades to be lifted and these sanctions to be relieved so that COVID relief can get in. It's technically legal for that relief to get in, but no bank, no entity is taking the risk without explicit instructions from Biden. So we're urging that. It's a very simple petition to fill out, and then share that on social media, please. The second action we are taking is to actually email our Congress members and senators and in support of Betty McCollum's bill, HR 2590, to tell Congress to ban Israel from abusing human rights with US dollars. This would make sure all the money that we're sending over there isn't going to things like abusing and torturing children, seizing and destroying Palestinian property, and would hopefully stop the unilateral annexation of Palestinian territory, which is in violation of international humanitarian law, at least with the money we send them. It's not perfect, nothing is, but this is a good bill that we are supporting. So we urge you to fill this out and it'll automatically identify who your representative is and both of your senators are, and it will send this to them. Customize the email as you see fit, add in your own personal stories, change up the subject line. All of that is to the good and will help it get noticed more. And then you can share that action as well. The third action is a phone call. Call your representative and your senators. It is super, super easy. It is a holiday weekend right now too, so you're just going to be leaving a voicemail, which means it's as easy as it can be. 202-224-3121 is the Capitol switchboard operators. Someone will answer and say, how can I help you? You just tell them the name of the person you want to connect to, and then you'll go there, you'll go through their voicemail, and you will leave a voicemail. If you're not sure who your senators are or your reps are, ask us and we can connect you. I also have this link here to find your senators. The script is on the next page. Maybe I need to zoom out a little bit. And the script is very, very simple. Urge you to co-sponsor, promote, and pass HR 2590 in the House and introduce and pass the same legislation in the Senate. Goes through a very quick script of what we're talking about. Make sure that you say your name and where you live. It's so critical that when we call our representative and our senators that we tell them, hey, we live in your district. This is my neighborhood or my zip code or my town or wherever it is where you live, whatever is the identifying thing, say that. Tell them where you live so they know they need to listen to you. I will leave this on the screen. I'm going to come back to it. Lastly is to just share this document on social media. It's a bit.ly/Palestine Action Kit. I've been posting it in the chat and I will post it again. But for a couple minutes, I will leave this on the screen. I will post the action again in the chat, and we will give everyone a couple minutes to take a break and to actually do these actions right now. It's awesome listening to people, hearing people, learning as much as we can about this, but we got to put it to action too if we actually want to get this change to occur. So I'm going to post this again, and please hop on the phone, send those emails, share on social media. All of these, you can take all of these actions in 5 minutes.
And Ryan, before we do that, if I may please, because I'm sure our speakers have other places to be as well, and they have a very tight schedule. I want to see if Bill can allow for everyone to please unmute themselves, and let's show some love to our speakers by just saying goodbye, and then we'll hop on to our call to action. I want to thank you, Sam, Ronnie, and Sister Hawaida and Mai for being here and sharing your experiences. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time we're going to be working together, and we will look forward to building this movement together with you. Bill, can we do that? Or Ryan, can we unmute everyone, please, before we hop on to call to action?
We can't unmute everyone at the same time.
Oh, no.
I didn't want to interrupt you and tell you.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Well, please show love in the chat to our speakers. We will say goodbye to you all, and we look forward to working together again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, excellent speakers, really fantastic conversations. A couple people in the chat, let me highlight myself here. We're sharing, never mind. A couple of people in the chat are asking if we'll send a follow-up email with these actions. We absolutely will. So feel free to do it right now. We have a couple minutes before we get started, or you can take it and do it tonight or tomorrow or anytime you'd like to. If you wait until Monday, you might get connected to a real human being and have a conversation, which is all to the positive as well.
And I'm just so happy and glad that we have, over 50 people still on the call. So we're very delighted. And from what we experience and what we've seen, Ryan, is that, these calls make a huge impact. So leaving a voicemail is very critical to push this movement forward.
A couple months ago, I was so glad to see it. AOC did this Instagram live stream, and they're like so long, but there was a part in it I chopped out because it was so important. I was sending it to activists where she said, you have to call your representative. You have to call your senators, because every day in Washington, what she hears and what has been going on for years is electeds say, oh, well, I don't hear about that issue from my constituents, so I don't care about it. They don't have to say anything if they don't hear anything about it. So it is really critical that we make sure that they know people care about these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. And I do want to let you know that we have Yemen coming up. So I'm going to start calling Katie Porter's office, leaving a message, because we definitely want for her to definitely co-sponsor this bill. I'll go back on mute, and we will see you back here at 2:30. Again, to travel to Yemen.
How'd your call go, Hanya?
Great. I'm sure she's so sick. Katie Porter is so sick and tired of hearing from me, but
No.
you know, it is what it is. And I just want to give a quick shout out, because I do see Norman Solomon here. And I also do see Marcy Winograd, who is just my mentor and just an inspiration. And Marcy is also the Code Pink Congress Tuesday night host, who launched the Code Pink Congress initiative. And I have the privilege of co-hosting those calls with her. So I do urge and invite everyone to please attend, because they are really life-changing.
Another legend on the call, Dr. Bill, is here.
Oh, yes.
Can't forget.
Hi, Dr. Bill. Hi, Dr. Bill. And a quick shout out to some of the board members at the Arab American Caucus who happen to be here, and my very own family who joins in. Yeah, so. Alrighty, we have about 1 minute to travel to the beautiful country of Yemen with our wonderful speakers, Hassan El Tayyib and Khawtar Abdullah, who will be introduced by myself and Ryan. And we'll talk about why Yemen is so critical to this conversation. So And thank you so much for those of you who've stayed and volunteered your time to really make an impact. And really, this movement would not be possible without every single one of you on this call. So we'll give one more minute and we will go to introduction. And
I'm going to go ahead and post the action kit for Yemen in the chat now. Oftentimes people can't stay the whole time. We want to make sure both of our actions happen today. So we're done with the occupied territories. Now I put yes even. Yemen is what that should say. Yemen, actually, wow, it auto-corrected me like crazy. We're going to try that again.
My goodness,
There
what
it
did we
is.
do with all these foreign names, Ryan?
I do
Really?
my best.
It is 2:30, so I do want to, really briefly do a quick introduction onto Yemen. And, I think Yemen is so critically important because it is literally a country, and a gorgeous country that is on the brink of economic collapse. And as we know, one of the largest humanitarian crises with over 400,000 children starving due to the US-backed Saudi-led blockade, which we'll discuss here. The purpose of this is for us to hear from our speakers, Legislative Director at Friends Committee on National Legislation, Hassan El-Tayyeb, and as well as Khawtar Abdullah of Yemeni Alliances Committee, followed by a Q&A, and us contacting our Congress representatives and our senators this time around as well, to urge the current administration to end the war on Yemen and stop all weapon sales by the Saudi regime. It is very important for you to please do put your questions in the chat, because I'm sure we have so many of them, and we want to be able to get to every single one of the questions. Without further ado, it is my absolute honor to introduce to you, and I asked him for permission to share this piece of information, and I'm sure all of you are going to very much enjoy having him here. He is the force behind the HR 49 resolution that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced along with Senator Bernie Sanders. Hassan El-Tayyeb is the lead lobbyist on Middle East policy. He is also responsible for really so many great things, I would have to say, with the Friends of Committee on National Legislation. And Hassan is a dear friend and really my mentor behind the Lift the Sanctions campaign. Prior to joining FCNL in August 2019, he was the co-director of the national advocacy group Just Foreign Policy, where he led their lobbying work to advance a more progressive foreign policy in the Middle East and in Latin America. He played a major role in the successful passage of the War Powers Resolution to end US military aid to Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen. Hassan's passion for foreign policy affairs is rooted in his desire to make life better for people in the Middle East, including his own family. Now, Hassan has written so many wonderful article pieces as well as legislations, and has been featured in a number of news outlets, including CNN, BBC, World News, The Hill, Al Jazeera, The Huffington Post, The Intercept, The Young Turks, and so much more. He was just recently shouted out by the Incredible Hulk himself, Mark Ruffalo, as well as Mark Pocan is a huge fan, and we're a very huge fan of Hassan as well. So if I've embarrassed you enough, please let me know.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
If I haven't, let me add more to your, But Hassan, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Hania, for bringing us all together. That last panel was incredible. I'm a good friend with Sam Husseini, just really appreciate his work, but the other speakers were just really powerful, and I'm just so glad we're raising up these issues. I think there's a lot that folks kind of think is not within their control with regards to foreign policy, but I'm really hoping that this conversation can help us feel more empowered to take action. And so many of these things come down to U.S. complicity, and I really want to get into that. So first off, what is the blockade's role in the humanitarian crisis in Yemen? So for more than 6 years, Saudi Arabia has imposed an air and sea blockade on Yemen that's restricted the flow of vital commercial and humanitarian goods into the country. And the restrictions have really been a leading driver of the humanitarian crisis, where now there are 16 million people living on the edge of famine. There are 2.3 million children suffering from acute malnutrition, and then 400,000 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition, which means that they will die this year without urgent treatment. So we're talking about 500,000 children. This is just obscene in 2021 that this could happen. And this is happening with U.S. support. So, there's a lot of things that people think about what's going on with Yemen. A lot of people have said, well, but didn't Biden end the war in Yemen? Didn't he make that announcement in February that, we've ended U.S. support? Well, he did make that announcement, but unfortunately, we really don't know the specifics of what that actually means. What's the difference between offensive and defensive support? In the beginning of the war, back in 2015, Obama said, we can support the Saudi-led coalition with weapon sales, logistical support for Saudi warplanes, maintenance, spare parts transfers, and also intelligence sharing. We're actually guiding and helping guide the missiles that are hitting these targets in Yemen. And just the tragedies that have happened with regards to, attacks on civilians has just been really insane. We're talking over 130,000 civilians have already died just from the fighting alone. And folks think, way more have perished, up to, 250,000 people have died as a result of the starvation as well. So this is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. We've been doing a lot of work on the blockade because we think it's just such a core driver of the starvation. Now, so a lot of people have asked, these specific questions about, Yemen in particular. What does ongoing U.S. complicity even look like? Although Biden announced an end to U.S. support for the Saudi coalition, the Department of Defense acknowledged in April that the U.S. is continuing to provide maintenance supports and transfers of spare parts for Saudi aircraft. And this support is essential to continue the offensive operations. Almost every other time an F-15 lands, you need to replace these spare parts. And without these civilian contractors providing the support, Saudi couldn't keep their air fleet going. They couldn't keep these airstrikes going. And that's a core component of them enforcing the blockade on Yemen. These warplanes are preventing ships from being able to berth in Hodeidah. The administration up until now is basically, they were denying that the blockade even existed. They say, well, food and commodities are able to get through, so it's not a blockade. That's literally what they said. But we've seen mounting pressure in thanks to so many advocates, probably many on this call, including, the whole RootsAction network and FCNL and dozens and dozens of organizations and members of Congress have been speaking out. And now we're at this place where the administration is saying, okay, we admit that the restrictions on imports through Hodeidah is a major problem that we have to stop. So we've gotten them to at least say that, and since January, Saudi Arabia has literally almost shut down all fuel imports into the country, which has exacerbated the humanitarian suffering greatly. So, the blockade's been going on for 6 years, but in the past several months, they've really pinched off the flow of fuel. And why is Saudi doing this right now? I mean, they've been doing this, at different levels, but right now we're kind of in an end game scenario with the war. The Houthis have basically taken over about 80% of of where the population centers are. They basically, have the entire country under their government structure. And the Saudi-led coalition is just hanging on to one last governorate called Marib. And there's this big offensive. And what Saudi is doing is they're really trying to use that blockade as leverage to get a deal with the Houthis. So this is their last piece of leverage. Essentially what they're doing is using starvation as leverage. In my opinion, and I think hopefully I share this with so many folks on this call, that starvation is a war crime. And well, the blockades and cutting off the flow of these humanitarian assistance and commodities is a war crime. And, starvation should never be used as a bargaining chip. That's bottom line. So now that we have the administration kind of saying, okay, we need to end the blockade, we have to know what they're using as leverage. I mean, we haven't stopped a lot of the weapon sales that are going to Saudi Arabia. Just like in the case with Israel, these are defensive weapons and we get away with selling them that way. Well, Saudi Arabia is claiming the same thing. Well, these are defensive, things to protect Saudi Arabia. So certain things have been allowed and others have not. Okay, we're going to stop the precision guided munitions, but we'll still sell them, all of these other items. And it's really hard to say, well, couldn't you use that for offensive operations? And do we have a real good accounting of that? Right now, we really don't. So, the good thing here is that we've gotten the House Foreign Affairs Committee to speak out. The chairman and the chairman of the Middle East Subcommittee have all basically said, end the blockade, decouple it from ongoing negotiations, lift it as a humanitarian act. That's great. 76 other members of the House, led by Dingell, Pocan, and Khanna, have also spoken out. Senator Warren has spoken out with 16 of her colleagues, and I think that's fantastic. The problem is we haven't seen progress, so this is where we need to come in and step in. We need legislation right now, I think, to put pressure on the coalition to end, to end the blockade, to end the war. We need to codify all the things that Biden said he actually ended, but put it into law. So we need new legislation. I think members of Congress could introduce and force a vote using the War Powers Act of 1973, using the Arms Export Control Act. It's funny, the more the countries and the name changes, the more things kind of stay the same. A lot of the problems we're dealing with in Gaza, although not completely similar, there's a lot of similarities, and especially similarities in the vehicles that we can use. So start thinking about that, as we're pushing legislation on Israel-Palestine. A lot of the same kind of thing could be applied to ending support for the war in Yemen. So, as a top policy priority, in conclusion, I think we need to use our vast leverage with Saudi and the UAE to unconditionally and immediately lift the blockade. Members of Congress really need to keep calling out the administration and introduce new legislation to prohibit all forms of U.S. support for the blockade and other offensive operations to the Saudi UAE-led coalition. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for spending this time. And I was very anxious to find out what happened with Senator Warren's letter that I know that we met about. And thank you for clarifying on that as well. We're going to have some questions. I'll give it back to Ryan to introduce our next speakers. And I do want to urge for everyone to please post their questions in the chat. Ryan, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Much appreciated. Our next speaker is Qatar Abdullah. Qatar is an organizer with the Yemeni Alliance Committee. The Yemeni Alliance Committee, which was formed after the first Muslim ban to support Yemeni American communities in the Bay Area during periods of social unrest. The YAC organizes protests and actions, coordinates congressional visits, creates social media toolkits and campaigns to resist anti-Yemeni policies. YAC's focus has been advocating to end U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen by raising awareness and pushing foreign policy. Qatar is the lead organizer of the YAC New York chapter. Qatar, let me get you, let me ask to unmute you here. Let me get you up on this screen. Sorry about the delay. There you are. Oh. There we go. And I'm going to get your video up showing as well. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm actually not feeling well, so I prefer to just not be on video if that's okay. I want to thank you guys for giving me the space and thank Hassan for kind of opening it up greatly and kind of really getting into what's happening in Yemen and on the ground. And so just to backtrack a bit, Saudi Arabia has been after Yemen for decades. There's a history of invasions, land grabbing, Currently, as you all know, Saudi Arabia has a geopolitical interest in Yemen as well, wanting to control Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the fourth most important trading route in the world. Bab el-Mandeb is located between Somalia and Yemen, and it connects to it is worth over 5 million. It connects to large bodies of water, where like 5 million barrels of oil flow through it daily, and it's the gateway to the Red Sea. And so, since the Gulf is the only wealthy due its oil production, and oil is very essential to economic superpowers want to help the Gulf, their allies, control these points. And so not just in Yemen, but also in different parts of the world, like Iran, this is what happens in Yemen. It is a focal point for the global economy. And because Iran is also an ally of the Ansar Allah movement, this makes Yemen more important for the stability of the kingdom of the Saudi Arabia and the UAE, United States, and other countries like Israel can't afford to ignore Bab el-Mandeb, and to ensure their allies like feel safe and Western interests are secure. And I think something that there's a lot of parallels between what's happening in Yemen and what's happening in Palestine. And yes, the blockade is what's happening right now with the blockade is a silent killer. And I'm going to go into it a bit more in depth later on. But I also want to, like, the bombing as well. Nothing has been off limit to the Saudi-led coalition and the UAE-led and the UAE countries' occupation inside of Yemen. They have bombed everything and anything sustainable, hospitals, schools, farms. They use chemical weapons to bomb farms. So that means in 7 years, farmers won't be able to use that land because that's how the damage is so deep. For anything and everything resourceful is bombed, and they would use the same tactic that Israel uses and claim that it is Houthi. Oh, there is a Houthi base or Houthi soldiers or Houthi storage weapons or whatever it is. The same tactics that they use, that Israel is using to justify their bombing of like schools and hospitals in Palestine is the same tactics that Israel uses inside of Yemen. I mean, Saudi Arabia uses inside of Yemen. And that is just, I think that doesn't get a lot of attention. Or I remember this when the Saudi bombed this school bus bombing. What was one of their justification? The children. It was a hub for child recruiting terrorism or whatnot, and it was just school kids going on a field trip to a cemetery because there's no other place to take them to have fun or whatnot. And there's videos of them before they were killed, just like laughing and having fun and kids being kids. But those were the justification that Saudi Arabia kind of used to justify the mass murder of children. And so back to like the blockade, and I'm going to go into like a bit of numbers of how the impact looks on the ground. As Hassan mentioned, the coalition imposed a naval land and air blockade that is backed by the U.S. Navy on Yemen, and it's been imposed on Yemen since the conflict began in March 2015. And this has severely restricted the flow of fuel and medicine to civilians. And just to touch on how like 80% of 80% of food and medicine and whatnot is imported from Yemen to Yemen, and so this blockade it really, really is the silent killer. Fuel, for example, it's needed in every aspect of life, because in Yemen, you have there's already over 400 medical facilities that has been bombed. And so the rest that are spared, we don't have electricity running. It's a privilege. And so 2 or 3 hours a day. So hospitals run on generators. And so you don't have fuel to run these hospitals because of the blockade. And also 70% of people in Yemen live in rural areas. And to get water into these areas, you need it's via trucks. And so there is no fuel for these trucks to provide water to these rural areas. And now this creates an area for diseases and because of lack of hygiene, like water or and whatnot. And so it's just it has a triple effect on everyday life. I'm sorry, I'm like talking so a lot. So
You're good.
yeah, so like also when this blockade was imposed, there was a denial, and for a while the denial was very, very heavily concentrated, even in DC till recently. And this just this denial is even a slap to injury. It's not. Yemenis are being starved, they're being pushed to famine, they're being bombed. Airport in Sana'a is closed, and the only airport available for Yemenis to travel out of Yemen is in Aden or Seyun, which are both in the south. And considering what is happening in the south, that is fueled by UAE, it's very hard for the northerners to go to the south. And it's also a long journey by car and bus, and hardly anyone has the means or health to travel there. So since 2015, over 230,000 Yemenis have been killed, and 2/3 of those civilian casualties are as a result of Saudi airstrikes. And over 8,500 Yemeni children have starved to death to the famine, according to Save the Children. Over 18 million Yemenis are food insecure. 90% of Yemenis do not have access to electricity. Over 16 million Yemenis do not have access to healthcare. Over 3 million are internally displaced because of the war, the blockade, and the ban that was imposed by Trump. Yemenis are effectively boxed, and not to mention most Yemenis would rather die in Yemen than flee. And for those who do flee, hardly any country is willing to take in Yemeni refugees. 2 million people are a step away from famine, and 7 million people are malnourished. As with all the crises, Yemeni women and children are the most vulnerable. 4.5 million children and pregnant women are acutely malnourished. This will drastically affect like infant mortality and development. I know, considering also how children, my cousins in Yemen, one of them is around, he was born around 2011 or 12, around that. And all his life, all he knows is war. And so he can't sleep because if he doesn't hear like gunshots or bombs or whatnot, because that's what he's used to all his life. And this is the amount of trauma that kids in the future will have. We're not even discussing all of the mental toll that it will take on future generations, because we're still on survival skill. We're still on like, are we going to make it throughout this day? When my family goes out to Yemen, to shop or to go to school or whatnot, just about their day, or when my aunt teaches, she says goodbye to her children, to her family, as though there is a possibility, and they have accepted that possibility, that they may not come back. And that is the reality of every Yemeni, and whether they support it or not, whether they're a part of this faction or this faction or support, this war has impacted everyone in one way or another. And that is the reality of the ground.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. And I really would love for you to please share with us in the chat, Sister Khatar, the work of Yemeni alliances and some of the organizations that you feel that all of our listeners here and at home right now can contribute to help with the, ensuring that our Yemeni brothers and sisters have support. But a really incredible question came up, and I want to kind of ask Hassan to perhaps address this. And Sister Khatar, if you'd like to add on to it, Iran's election is coming up. in just in a couple of weeks actually here. And how effective do you think the Saudi Arabia and Iran private talks are right now in Baghdad, sponsored by Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Khatimi, who is the former intelligence chief, and Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, agreeing to hold talks with the United Arab Emirates to ease the military knot in Yemen? And how do you think that's going to shift now with the elections coming up in Iran, which probably will be putting Iran at a more hardliner place, right? Rather than more progressive. Hassan, if you could take a jab at this, that would be great.
Yeah. First off, I wanted to just thank Kawathar for speaking to us like in just such a powerful way. I think you've got such a powerful voice in this movement. I'm just really thankful for you. I'm also really thankful for Yemeni Alliance Committee. I don't know if a lot of people know this backstory, but they were the ones that basically, they did a big rally in front of Speaker Pelosi's office, and she co-sponsored the war powers that same day. And this was led by Jahan Hakim, and then a lot of folks in New York also did a sit-in in Chairman Engel, the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, in his office, and got him to start supporting this. So I just wanted to say, like, grassroots activism has driven this whole conversation for years and years and years, led by Yemeni Americans. And I just wanted to say that before I jump into this other question. She also mentioned Dr. Aisha Juman and the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Yemen needs humanitarian aid. I did a little concert in my yard, and my bass player's kid had a lemonade for Yemen aid stand. We raised $140. Yemen needs a lot more than that. So, reach in your pockets, give to Yemeni Alliance. We'll give to them too, but Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. To go back to the question at hand, now, just to zoom out, what's happening right now is the U.S. is trying to restore the Iran nuclear deal. Iran's trying to get rid of the sanctions regime, and thank you, RootsAction, for trying to, bypass, to lift the sanctions, essentially, which is also killing people in Iran, which is something that is just really tragic. There's also this, conversations behind the scenes between Saudi and Iran about regional power sharing. What I think is happening is that, and you're right to mention that there is an election coming up and conservative hardliners might gain power. And we just learned that they're not even allowing a reformist candidate to run for office. So the diplomat that we had in Javad Zarif and Hassan Rouhani, that might not be with us that much longer. So what I'm trying to say here more broadly is that there is a larger conversation happening, and I worry that the administration is trying to have a grand bargain that includes ending the blockade to have a deal with the Houthis. And unfortunately, that means that's unacceptable to me. And what we need to do is pressure Congress to pressure the administration. That's our only hope right now. We really need to force a vote to end this support for the war, and that'll help speed up this whole process of ending it.
Thank you, Hassan. And Sister Khawtar, if you'd like to add on to this as well, that would be great.
No, I think Hassan covered it.
Okay. Sure. And just really quickly, can you talk about the role that women play also in the political arena in Yemen right now, and if there is in fact female-led representation that's addressing the war crimes?
Yeah, women are the backbone of Yemeni society, and they have been the leading work, whether it's being the mom and the dad and the sister and brother when the husband is killed in the battlefield or at the supermarket or whatnot. It's them who now have to stop whatever they're doing, continue take on this new responsibility to take care of their children, be that parent, be the sole provider, and whatnot, and they don't get credit for that as much. There are women in Yemen who are doing amazing work, and Radia Al Mutawakkil, her organization, it is documenting human rights violations inside of Yemen by all sides, and it is led by Yemeni women, and there are also other great women inside of Yemen that are just doing day-to-day roles that keep everyone going and keep I guess the family structure there. There are the teachers, they are the doctors, they are the nurses. I remember when my aunt, she's a teacher, and they stopped her salary for about 2 years or whatnot. And so for those 2 years, there's people who couldn't afford to continue teaching. They had to get other jobs and whatnot. And a lot of them, and my aunt was one of them, she would gather neighborhood kids inside of an abandoned house and continue teaching. So it was that kind of love and determination to teach the next generation, or they would all chip in and have like a mutual fund, like all the teachers, although they don't have a salary, and they would like every month everyone would chip in, and it would go to their students, because one of their students had to and ninth grader, and some of them eighth grader, had to quit school because their dad was killed or their older brother was killed, and now they had to be the sole provider, and they would quit school to go open a cart or to sell things, to be the now they're the sole provider for their families. And the teachers, although they don't have the means to, they'll kind of gather what they can, and every month try to bring those students in and try to do whatever they can to play the role of just helping whoever they can. And that's just one less student out of the battlefield, or that's less one student who's now not going to grow up without schooling. That's one less student who might not be killed being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So women are really playing this crucial role. And women here in New York, it's Yemeni women who are doing amazing work. Jihan Hakim with the Yemeni Alliance Committee chairperson, Aisha Jama'an, Dr. Shireen Al-Aidami, Hanan, Yahya, all these amazing women, and they're all amazing Yemeni women who are doing the work for Yemen. So I would say Yemen, although they are the most often impacted, they are also the most resilient and determined to do this work.
Thank you, Sister Khatar, and thank you for the work that you do. We're very humbled and honored to have you. And just this past month, we had Dr. Aisha Jumman and Sister Shireen Aidami here on the call as well. And I do want to just add, before I hand it over to Ryan and have him and Hassan perhaps lead the call to action here together, is Dr. Jumman's organization is one of the very few organizations that provides, volunteer-based, provides humanitarian aid on the ground, such as rice, oil, just the basic necessities that Yemeni families require to survive. I highly urge for you to donate as much as you can, because even $20 a month goes a long way. So us setting aside a cup of coffee a day and that price, and providing that money at the end of the month to ensure that Yemeni children have access to food and water, and just the basics will be incredible. I do want to hand it over to Ryan for a call to action. And Sister Khaltar, if you could put your information with the organization that you're a part of, so we can get more engaged and involved with the work that you do and Sister Jahan does, we'd greatly appreciate it. I'll hand it back to Ryan and Hassan.
Thank you very much, Hanya. Yeah, thank you so much, Hassan. Thank you so much, Qatar. I'm glad Dr. Aisha and Dr. Juman came up, because we spoke with them last month, and they're just a wealth of information and knowledge about this situation. We are going to move now into our action really quickly. I am going to share my screen now. Make sure I do this right. All right. All right. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Yes. Okay. We are good to go. So just like with the Occupied Palestinian Territory Action Kit, our very first action is to sign this petition to lift the sanctions for COVID relief. That is why we started this campaign, because of the sanctions, because of the blockades. Nothing is getting in to help places like Gaza, like Yemen. And although, like I said during our last action, it is legal technically for banks to provide loans, for suppliers to let this stuff in, they're not going to do it without explicit permission from the US government. It's too risky for their businesses, for their banks, and obviously in the US, we put that stuff above human lives, unfortunately. So we absolutely have to get this signed. Please share it. It's super easy to sign it, and share it on social media. Our second action is to send an automated letter to your representative and your senators to call on them to immediately end the US involvement in the war in Yemen. So super easy. You will fill out your name, your address. It'll automatically connect you to your senators and your representative. You can edit, augment, add to the subject line and the letter that's right here, but it is already written. So if you just put your information in and press send, your reps will get this. They write me back all the time now because they get my letters constantly. Super easy to do. Definitely urge you to do this. And it's important to know that both the House and Senate have voted twice to end the war in Yemen. And it was vetoed by then President Trump. So we need to get them to do this again. And ideally, Biden does not veto it. So that's our second action there. Go ahead. Was someone going to say something?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan, for putting this out there. If I may, I had something to add, unless there's more.
Real quick, the third action is a phone call, which we will get to in a second, and then to share this document. But we'll get to the phone call in 1 second. Hassan, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I really appreciate you doing this. I just wanted to also say one more thing. Right now, we're kind of in a race against time. And the best thing that we can do for Yemen is to force Congress to take a vote to end support. And this is a specific thing that they can do. Any one of your members can introduce a war powers resolution. And that will trigger, a big vote and debate. And that's the most, probably one of the most pressing things that we can do if they do that. And this action right here will actually help us build support for that very vote. But if folks want to take that extra step and meet with their member of Congress, they're willing to speak with constituents, and that's you. So I just wanted to put that out there that, on top of emailing, if I feel like the crowd here seems like the kind of crowd that knows the foreign policy staffer in their office, and all you got to say is I'd like you to introduce a war powers resolution to end support for the Yemen war, and that could be super helpful. Just saying, we need your help. We've been hammering on this for months and months and months, and we really need to amp up the pressure.
I agree completely. Thank you so much, Hassan. Yeah, getting in front of your representative is so critical. We don't have to target specifically the head of this committee or anything like this. Any of them can do this. So it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who your rep is. This stuff's really important. And thank you, Hassan, for all your work on this. It's critical stuff we're doing here. Going back to the actions, calling your representative and senator, critical stuff, the emails as well. To call your representative and senators, we rely on the Capitol switchboard because it's so easy. It's one phone number, 202-224-3121. You call that, someone will answer and say, who can I connect you with? You tell them, connect me with Senator XYZ, Representative whoever. They'll connect you. You'll hear their voicemail because it is a holiday weekend. Nobody's going to be answering their phones. And then you will leave a voicemail. And here's a pretty easy sample script about it. And we mentioned here that the House and Senate each voted twice with strong bipartisan majorities. We are winning on this issue. We just need to get someone to reintroduce it now when we don't have a president that'll veto it, which seems like it would be easy. So they need this pressure right now. They need to hear from all of you. So yes, please take these actions. And then quickly, the last thing is to share this document, bit.ly/Yemen Action Kit. You can share this everywhere. Anybody can have access to this. Share it on social media, send it in an email. We will also do a follow-up email where we send this action kit and the Palestine one to everybody, so you will have it. These don't expire. These don't go away. We can keep pushing for this until we win, which we will. So that's where we're at right now. Hania, you want to go ahead and give some thank yous?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we are going to continue to do these calls through Lift the Sanctions Campaign in partnership with RootsAction, Peace Action, World Beyond War, Muslim Delegates and Allies, Progressive Democrats of America, Middle East Alliances, and PDA National. So I want to urge for everyone to please be on the lookout for our next month event. I want to send my heartfelt thank you to Hassan El Tayyib, who again has been my rock through all of this, with Lift the Sanctions, and Norman Solomon and Ryan Black, who I have the privilege and honor to work with on a day-to-day basis. So, and as well as send my heartfelt gratitude to Sister Khatar, who has participated in this discussion and has made such a great impact. Before we go to call to action, which I'm hoping everyone has their phones charged, please send your love in the chat to our great speakers. I'm sure they have places to be and things to do this Saturday. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Hassan Al Khatar, and I really look forward to working together. So have a good day. That's if you have to go, but if you want to sit here and take the call to action with us, you're more than welcome to.
That's right, and we'll stick on the phone for another 5 to 10 minutes or so and let people get these actions done. Answer any questions we have. The chat room is always open, so feel free to engage and talk to us, and we'll be right here reading it for a little bit longer.
All right.
Fantastic call today. Really, really great speakers. Really great stuff today.
And Ryan, can we also share the switchboard number one more time in the chat for people?
Yeah, I'll copy it and put
Beautiful.
it in the chat.
Thank you.
So that I don't get rid of that screen there.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that we are live streaming from the RootsAction website, and I will definitely be saving the chat. If you'd like to get in contact with any of our speakers, please let myself know. Yeah, let's grab our phones, let's make these calls and make that impact. And it would be really great for you to update us on who you've called and if you were able to leave a message. So I'll go on mute, I'll have my phone, and Hassan, you're unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, did you want to make the last comment with Sister Khatar?
I accidentally went off mute.
That's okay.
I kind of feel like the guy that the lawyer who accidentally was a cat. Not quite that bad. I'm not a cat, I swear.
No, that's fine. You're just a force to reckon with. You're not a cat, but a force to reckon with. So,
well, actually, one thing, if I may, we also set up endtheblockade.com.
Please share. Absolutely.
That's another, just if you forget, and you want to share it with a friend, and I think the RootsAction link, it's kind of the same ask essentially, but endtheblockade.com is set up, and it can, you can use it to email your reps. I'm assuming a lot of people here are from California. If you are, I just wanted to let you know that you can thank both, you can thank Padilla, in particular, for signing the letter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you'd never share that wonderful story with me.
Yeah. So I think it's just, good to thank folks that we can, and, they deserve to be thanked there.
So then I think the pressure then needs to be on Feinstein at this point.
Yeah.
to endorse. Okay.
No, actually, I'm sorry. So Padilla and Feinstein both signed the Warren letter to end the blockade. So now that actually sets it up. You have something to thank them for, and now a next step. Thank you for signing the letter. The blockade is still bad. Time to introduce legislation, war powers resolution. They already voted, well, at least Feinstein already voted for the war powers resolution back in 2019 and 2018 too. So she's already voted for 2 war powers resolutions and voted to override Trump's veto of the war powers resolution. So, now we got to take some next steps here. And I think that's a great ask for both Padilla and Feinstein.
And
A quick follow-up. Oh, sorry, just a quick follow-up on what Hassan said right there. Thanking your representative is really important. It is so important. Like, they spend all day getting yelled at and told they're terrible. When they hear a thank you, they hear it and they listen. And that will promote them doing the right thing more often, which is what we want from them. So definitely thank them. And it shows that you're paying attention and you're not just just a robot or anything like that. We're real people out here. We appreciate when they do the good things, and we're going to be critical when they don't do the good things. So that's important stuff.
And, thank you for bringing that up, Ryan, because I sometimes fail to do that, and I shouldn't, because we do definitely want to build bridges, not burn them, especially now that we have such a great momentum with, in terms of foreign policy and our engagement as communities and as marginalized communities. But I wanted to ask you, Hassan, to kind of maybe go over really quickly about what the Warren letter is asking for those of us who are not very familiar with it on the call. And someone just said that they want to be in a band and hear you sing. So perhaps our next call is going to be about a concert with Hassan El-Tayeb and foreign policy. But yeah.
Let's have some music. I think that would be super fun. So I'm wondering, Rima put in a note. I don't quite understand. Just type the text here so we send the correct text.
Okay. So
the letter.
If you could tell us what that letter is, because I think that was another question. And Rima, I'll let you unmute so you can ask the question yourself here.
Absolutely. So I just dropped the Warren letter in the chat. Now, this letter calls on Biden to use leverage on Saudi Arabia to end the blockade. So right now, the Biden administration, like I explained earlier, they're just saying, well, we don't like the restrictions. That's it. What the Warren letter asks is, are you going to cut off weapons sales to end this blockade? And that's where we need congressional pressure. The statements are great. It's time to put some teeth on it. Time for some legislation.
Hassan, basically, we're going to say thank you for voting on the War Powers Resolution, and we would like you to
introduce another war powers resolution to finally end support for the war in Yemen.
We're essentially asking them to do the same thing they've already done.
But we want.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Hassan.
And we want them to lead it. And that's the difference. Before they just voted on it, and I got to say, we've been talking to a lot of offices. Now the problem here is no one wants to challenge Biden. So the statements are one thing, but what would really challenge the Biden administration right now is to have, they really don't want to see the entire Senate vote on something that we could easily pass and then make him, force him to essentially sign this bill into law to fully end all participation, including that maintenance support that's so critical to keep the Saudi warplanes in the air. There are military officials basically watching civilian contractors, fix these warplanes that are flying into Yemen and blowing up blowing up people and civilians and enforcing the blockade. So that's why we need them to introduce that legislation. And any one of your members of the House and Senate can do this very simple act. All you have to do is just submit a piece of paper to Congress, and you can force a whole vote and debate.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sorry.
If I may. So thank you, and then we would like you to lead introducing another war power resolution to end the blockade on Yemen and maintenance support and arms sale to KSA. That's it, right?
Yes, that was brilliant. That's what we want. And invite all your friends. That's another powerful thing when you do lobbying. Everyone here is just so rich in deep networks of people that are really influential to your member of Congress. Bring them along. And in the world of Zoom, you can reach the DC staffer. You don't have to talk to the district staffer anymore. Say, I want to talk to the foreign policy staffer in DC. And I meet with these folks all the time. The constituents meet with them all the time. And I just want people to know that in the Zoom world, you can actually talk to the policy staffer in a way like never before.
Thank you for that note, Hassan. And with that said, let's take the next few moments to make sure that we complete the call to action. Give us a quick update in the chat in terms of your progression. And Hassan, thank you so much for sharing that warn letter link here as well for us. All right, let's take it away.
Kothar, do you get a voicemail when you call in, or does it just ring forever?
It usually just rings forever, and then voicemail is like full. She has multiple offices, like one in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan. I call both of them. Sometimes I'd have to like get their attention, go to the office in order for them to listen.
Gotcha. Yeah, some reps and senators are notorious for full inboxes. Usually we hear it from, in California, Feinstein and Padilla. I mean, every week one of them has a full inbox. That's unfortunate, though. Try the DC office too. I just call anyone you can, try to get through, but that's not great when they're not available.
And that's one really good thing about doing in-person meetings and actually having the meeting with the staffer is that you do it once and then you get their email and you can continually email I just actually shared with Kawathar, one of the staffers, that I think she should email. So we got a little in there.
Nice.
I'm just very embarrassed that I've been saying your name wrong, Kawathar, this whole time. As an Iranian, I do apologize.
It's Kother. It's fine.
Okay, Kauthar, okay.
Yeah, it's Kother. Yeah.
So Hassan, you stand corrected.
I can't even pronounce my own name according to Aisha.
When you say it, I'm like, it's Hassan, but okay, I can't correct how he says his own name.
No, please do. You have the full green light to call me whatever enunciation of that you'd like. I was raised by a bunch of salty Italians from Boston. So it's I'm lucky I can even can pronounce my name even to the level I'm at now. So.
Well,
being from Indiana, where I have Amish people about 15 minutes away from me who speak just German, Hanya's had to coach me a little bit on some of the pronunciations of names, which I appreciate.
well, we had this call with RootsAction strategy call a couple of days ago, and the subject of names came up, and there were questions about do you say Hania, do you say Hanie, or how is the name correctly pronounced? And I said my name is originally an Arabic name. So our Arab community pronounces it a different way. Our Iranian community pronounces it a different way. And at the end of the day, the combination of both for me has been the most challenging to combat. So, but it's Haniye in Arabic. Sister Rima, you could probably let me know how it's pronounced. I'll ask you to unmute, but it's Haniya, I believe, if I'm not.
We say Hanya.
Haniya, okay. Haniye is the Iranian version, so
Okay.
the version, yeah. But it is.
I love your name. It's so nice.
Thank you, Hassan.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I wish I could say the same about yours, but I'm kidding. I'm so.
Because Hanya means something and Haniya means something else.
So, from my understanding, it is Prophet Muhammad's daughter's. One of her nicknames was Hania, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Haniya means somebody who's easy to get along with. They have a very bright demeanor, very easy to work with them, like peaceful, that type of thing. Haniya.
Mm.
And Hanya, it's more of a name, just like Rima. Rima, the reem means a baby gazelle, and so it became Rima, and so that's.
Oh, that's sweet. That's sweet. Like Ghazala, for example.
Blissful, yes. That said blissful. Similar to that, very easy to get along with. Yes.
Ryan, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, the easy to get along with, and which you can probably,
They absolutely,
do.
Your parents nailed your name 100%.
Don't lie.
Is blissful and easy to get along with.
Don't lie. I know you're being sarcastic, but I do want to say that it is 3:27, and we are coming to the end of our monthly call to action. And again, I am so honored and so privileged to have the participants on this call stay for a couple of hours with us to make these calls, and we're definitely making a huge impact. And again, I'm very thankful to be in your presence and to see so many familiar faces as well as so many new ones being here, calling out Congress members and representatives. I'll let you, Ryan, have also.
Well, may I ask one last question? Do we send the same letter to, for me, Katie Porter, saying introduce a resolution in the House, a war powers resolution in the House?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this is something, Sister Rima, that she'd be very interested in doing. I see her as an ally now. So, all right, Ryan, if you'd like to close us out also.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming and joining us today. We had several amazing conversations. We got a lot of actions done, a lot of phone calls made, a lot of emails sent, which is all to the good. Please share these documents that we sent around with your networks on social media, through your email lists, whoever you know who may be interested in this stuff. We need to pump it up as much as possible. The biggest issue, especially with Yemen, is people don't know enough about it. It's not the issue. The news doesn't lead with it. So it's just critical that this person-to-person networking is happening surrounding these issues. And also that we're all doing the dirty work of actually calling our representatives and sending in these emails. We have to do it. And so I'm grateful to everybody who joined us today to take part in this. And you are all so much appreciated. And thank you, Hanya, for putting this event on. Great working with you as always. And with that, check us out on YouTube. This whole live stream, I'm looking over to my left right now, is going on right now. So that'll be up on YouTube forever. We'll get it out on social media. Contact me, Ryan@rootsaction.org, or Hanya, if you have any questions or follow-ups. Go to liftthesanctions.org and please sign our petition there and get involved. And with that, thank you again for joining us. And we will be back in a month for another fantastic call with more speakers.
And can I just add, Ryan, you rock. And thank you for putting up with me. And next month when we all come together, if Ryan is with us on that call, he will be a brand new father. So congratulations.
I might not be here next month.
Okay. Okay. Well, then Hassan Al Tayyib may volunteer to actually co-host with me.
That's right. Baby is due exactly 1 month minus 1 day from today, June 28th. So.
Hassan, we got our work cut out.
Oh, we do have our work cut out. You know, Ryan, I'm sorry, there's no excuse. The world needs you. No,
I get it. I get it.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. That's fantastic news. Congrats. I didn't know that. It's wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful rest of your Saturday. Just know deeply that you've made an impact today, and we look forward to doing the same thing next month. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And Ryan?
Yep.
I am going to save the chat really quick. On my end, it just